Hello and welcome back to what is probably a pretty crap day for a lot of Asustor NAS users in the last 24 hours or so. If you're not aware, and maybe you're an Asustor user that's seen this title and you're coming onto this video, there has been a big old ransomware attack of Asustor devices there. This ransomware, familiar to a number of us, known as Deadbolt. This ransomware gets inside your system and encrypts all of your data and then asks for a little bit of bunts in return to unlock them. But unfortunately, it's a little bit more than that, and it has to be said in this instance, although a lot of things are still yet to be fully confirmed, just a quick look at a lot of the stuff online with regards to, official forums, Reddit, Twitter, that sort of thing. Some pretty consistent threads can be ascertained, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about a lot of those threads. I'm going to talk about pretty much the three main positions and scenarios people are in right now who have been affected by this, and ultimately go through some of the things you can do not to resolve it really, maybe hope for the future, but I'm going to go through each of the instances that people are in right now, where we're at with each of them. This video should be chaptered as well. At the end of the video, some hopeful conclusions that, fingers crossed, we could get to. But first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about that attack. It looks like it almost certainly, again, not completely confirmed, that this has happened due to the Easy Connect remote access system with the Asustor NAS platform there. Easy for the Connect, for those that aren't aware, is the ability to access your Asustor NAS remotely. We've heard this kind of thing happen before in this kind of way, using preset system services to remote access the NAS. People relying a lot on default setups of their systems to allow them to access the contents of the NAS and their data generally, or for backing up remotely via the internet, not just via the local area network. Now, in of itself, remote access isn't bad, it's how it's conducted. So first and foremost, it's when that remote access is being set up without suitable provisions, such as firewalls, such as VPNs, such as randomized or unusual security layers in between and port numbers, but also the idea that people are still becoming overly reliant on default values, and particularly with regards to ports and that old admin account. And later in the video, I am going to talk about some of the changes that people who haven't been affected by this should really implement moving forward. But right now, users are finding themselves in three very distinct positions right now, and I will go into more detail on each of them later in the video. The first one is they're being greeted by a big old black screen there that is saying to them, your NAS has been hit by the Deadbolt ransomware and we have encrypted the contents of your NAS. In order to get access to it again, you have to make a payment to a Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency wallet there, and then from there, you make that payment, you get a key back, you stick it into the box, and the system will unencrypt your data. So that's instance one that people are in, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. The second position that people are finding themselves in is they manage to navigate around this, whether they could still access the NAS via their standard network protocols. It's appearing on their local native file management software, but on top of that, they're able to navigate around it by using things like SSH to remotely access command line on the system. And they found that the main splash screen there, an index file, the original, has been backed up by these nefarious individuals, no doubt part of the replacement process if you pay the ransom fee, and what they've done is just swapped them out and removed it. So again, a lot of that is detailed, all of this is detailed in an article in the description, but moreover, when people have replaced that, from here is when they've seen the damage thus far they've got in. Now, a lot of that reason for that splash screen isn't just to make it easier for people to pay, because ransomware organizations like this, they don't want to completely suspend your access to the system. That would be madness, because how on earth are you going to give them money? There has to be leverage. But the reason they put that black screen there is because this ransomware, when it kicks off, one of the first things it does is play with the system's files, the core system files, in order to present that splash screen. And in most cases, people have seen that that splash screen has been one of the first things, and after that, the encryption is taking place there in the background. Consequently, when that splash screen does there on screen, the ransomware hasn't finished. In many cases, it's barely even begun. There's been renaming of directories and files with the format and prefix .deadbolt, but with encryption not completely taking place yet. So if you can get around that, then you can kill the process, something we'll talk about later on as well. But a lot of users immediately upon seeing this have gone, oh my God, 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 and then immediately have just powered down the device, ripped out the power cable and turned it off. And unfortunately, that has led to the third scenario that people are finding themselves in, which is that upon rebooting the system without a network cable in the rear, they have been presented by no NAS being visible and the client application for PC and Mac known as Asustor Control Center is now saying this NAS is uninitialized. And if you initialize it, it will format everything. Now, this isn't what the ransomware group want because they're not going to get paid. And now it's removed the ability to not only pay them, but also the unencryption key for you on the way back. But also, now you have lost the means to talk to the device at all. And that is because it looks, again, and most of this is just based on evidence, maybe it will change later and I'll be proved wrong. But based on everything we've seen, it looks like when this ransomware hits and it encrypts that system files, by powering down the device as that knee-jerk reaction, which again is completely understandable in the circumstances for the non-tech savvy, the result is that the changing of those core system files has corrupted the system's operating system, the system's services, and therefore the means to interact with it have become fragmented overall. So from this point, I want to start talking about recommendations from users and recommendations from Asustor themselves of what to do right now. Because as of I think 8 AM Greenwich Mean Time this morning, Asustor published on their forums recommendations of stuff to do. And if you believe you're in the process of being attacked right now, they make the following recommendations. What you need to do is to pull out the Ethernet cable from the rear of your device, like so. And then from there, hold the power button down for 3 seconds. It's really important you get that number right. And again, this is from their own recommendations, their own page. What you need to do, hold it for 3 seconds, like so. 2, 3. And you'll hear that beep. Do not hold it longer than that. Because if you hold it down for longer than that, which is what people have been doing, it does a forced shutdown and it can interrupt those services. What you're doing here is a safe shutdown where it basically suspends those services one by one in the most safe way it can internally, and it will power down itself right now. Now, from there, from this point is where things get difficult. And remember, what I've just showed you is when you're in the instance of being attacked. If you're not being attacked, then later on in the video we'll talk about some of the provisions and things you can do moving forward. But once you've done that, once you've powered that down, that avoids that initialization issue mentioned earlier on. And again, do head over, remember that is if you're in the process of being attacked, because now it's finished powering down safely. You can then fill out the forms available online at Asustor, as well as linked in the article in the description, where you can contact Asustor about the state of play there. But let's just say you didn't want to power it down in that way. You need this NAS, and you want to fight against the process that's being done. The next part of this video, I'm going to reboot this device now, is I'm going to show you and walk you through each of the different instances of what you need to do if you've been hit by this, as well as if you haven't been hit by it yet and you want to provision against it. And at the end of the video, I'm sure it's all chapterized as mentioned, I will talk about where things may be going after this and where resolution may be possible. Let's make our way to the screen. Okay, so I've made my way into the Asustor NAS here that we've rebooted. Now, I should have mentioned this at the top of the video, but I will highlight it again here. I don't have a Deadbolt affected Asustor NAS here. I will have one here in a few days where I'm going to be conducting some kind of Linux recovery on that, see if there's anything I can do, and there'll hopefully be some content on that later this week. But for now, all the information I'm showing you here comes from multiple sources, all of which I will reference, as well as guidelines to go through them. Now, the first thing, let's talk about that horrible splash screen there. Now, as mentioned, this splash screen here is being designed twofold. One, to allow you the means to send the attackers the money and get the key back, but also as a delay tactic. And this splash screen is utilized to stop you getting into the system and trying to inhibit or prevent you stopping the processes moving forward. So in this part of the video, I'm going to show you a couple of things. I'm going to guide you through, and again, I say guide, I'm going to point you in the direction of the resources to not only get around this splash screen, but also how to kill the processes on the Asustor NAS, because if we go back to my article, a couple of users that have been super helpful in the comments and on other websites. First and foremost is Clinton Hall, who talks you through how to kill the process, but also user down here, Bill Sargent, guided users through on how to get around that horrible splash screen. But it's worth highlighting that you're going to need two things in order to get around this. Firstly, you're going to need an SSH command user interface. Again, most people use PuTTY. There's a bunch of others out there, and this is kind of a command line user interface here, where you open up a dialog with a specific IP, and then from there you log in as the root device, and then from there it allows you to interact. Now, bear in mind, everything you're doing here not only requires a certain skill set, or maybe a degree of a learning curve a lot of you may not have, and therefore you may want to just power down the device via the recommended means I mentioned earlier on that come from Asustor, using the power button there and disconnecting the Ethernet. But this is for people that don't mind doing a bit of tinkering, and this will allow you to kill that process. But just bear in mind, if that process is running, you're up against a clock here, a clock that you may do well to just power down the device safely, as mentioned. Sorry about the seagulls there. What you need to do is, once you've got PuTTY uploaded and put in your IP there from your NAS there at the top, from there you need to start entering the following command lines, because the user Bill Sargent from the Asustor forums noticed that the original index CGI, which is the user interface of your Asustor, was backed up. The Deadbolt attack takes the original index CGI, stores it to one side and replaces it with a new one. And what this process do via SSH is logs in, allows you to access it and change those over. So again, it allows you to kill that older process, kill that older index and replace it with a new one, allowing you to log into the NAS there. Now again, after you've done that, the next question is the process itself. When you're doing anything on the Asustor NAS, it's going to be utilizing a degree of hardware, CPU, memory, or more. The weaker your NAS, the more resources are going to be used by this process. And a number of users very early doors noticed that the Deadbolt process was incredibly pronounced. Not just the LEDs flicking around like crazy on your NAS, but also in the hogging of the resources. Now, the user Clinton Hall, who put some information there in the comments, detailed that when logging in via SSH as a root user, he was able to see that the process was being conducted by a process ID 25624. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same for you, but with regards to the binary file that is executing this and the process itself, it allowed him to kill that process. You can't right-click or anything like that on the activity monitor. I think only QNAP is a brand that allows you to kill processes from within the NAS user interface, but by following the guidelines here, if you're prepared to do so, because remember, you are still talking about SSH tinkering here, it will allow you to change a lot of that stuff. Now, it's worth highlighting, on your Asustor NAS, you will need to have enabled SSH in order to do this. So go into the services box. If you have got access, which I know sounds ridiculous if you've not enabled it, in a very chicken and egg situation, but you are going to have to make sure you've got SSH enabled. By default, the terminal option there, SSH is disabled by default. Can you hear those mad seagulls? Gotta love the weather recently. Now, if you enable this, it will allow you, via a port number of your choosing, do make sure you keep it as unique as possible, to access your system via SSH. However, like in any ransomware attack, it is highly advised that you disable SSH in the event of a ransomware hit afterwards. So if you are going to enable this, do it because you want to kill the process manually. Otherwise, unless you need it for your current business operations, and you're running and communicating with servers via command line SSH, then disable this. Only enable this right now if you plan on trying to kill this process manually, because if you enable it anyway, you may be doing more harm than good. But as mentioned, there is a breakdown of using the command line within the likes of PuTTY and more accessing the NAS over SSH to kill that process, as well as detailing there by Clinton Hall how to get past that splash screen as well. So again, this is something you can try to do, but personally, this is quite something I think only the real techies out there should be attempting, and the rest of you should be powering down the NAS at least temporarily in order to get around this later if other provisions and tools appear. Now, next up, I want to talk about if you haven't been hit by Deadbolt and what you need to do on your settings right now. Now, if you are looking at your NAS, you're looking at the desktop interface here, you've gone into the activity monitor, you're not seeing anything untoward, you're not seeing anything dodge, you're not seeing your your hard drive LEDs going nuts. These are some of the things you're going to have to go through. Now, once again, much like the article I mentioned earlier on, where we talked about on the Asustor official response, they did detail some of the stuff you need to do. I'm just going to guide you through a lot of those, including a couple of other things that weren't touched on there that are worth bearing in mind and going through. So the first thing you need to do is maybe disable that admin account. If you're running an admin account on your system, that is a power user account that probably isn't needed. So as you can see there, when I've created this new installation of ADM, there's my own account there, but the admin account. Now, it should be deactivated by default in the latest update, but if you're not running the latest update, it may not be disabled. So make sure you disable it there by clicking edit, and then you can go through the options and disable the account if you choose to. Again, this is a relatively recent update to ADM's platform, and if you haven't updated to the latest firmware, that may be problematic for you. The next thing you need to do is enable two-step verification. Go into your user account at the top of the screen there, go down to personal. From there, go down, and there's a tick box here that you tick it, and it will guide you through the steps of enabling two-step verification. Now, you'll need to install an app such as Google Authenticator, and it will allow you to make sure that no one can access the NAS remotely without that extra stage of authentication on your phone. Now, bear in mind, if you've left SSH and you're open and you're using default ports, this can still be worked around. But still, in the more traditional sense, if you're not using two-step verification, get on that immediately. Now, going back to my earlier point, when it comes to how the system could be activated, go into the services box here, and there's a list of all of the active services on your Asustor NAS. Now, once again, I've installed a fresh copy of ADM, the latest version, on this system. You may not have the latest version installed, or you've used an older version and you've not updated a number of these settings, so you may not know which of these services and communication tools you're currently using or enabling. You may be using DLNA, but the rest of it, such as SMB, which is good for mapping and stuff like that, you may be using. And if you're not using them, maybe consider turning them off until you need them. Once again, unless you plan on trying to fight against a lot of this with command line stuff, and unless you know what you're doing, I do recommend turning off SSH right now, as do the brand and most users. But going through, if you're using an rsync server, this can, without credentials, allow remote access via another third-party server. So once again, if you're not going to use it, turn it off. Turn it off if you're not going to use it. It's as simple as that. Again, most of these have been disabled by default in most instances. But it has to be said that, again, in old firmware, maybe your previous settings may still well apply. Now, next, let's talk about remote access on the system. And that is, of course, when I'm talking about Easy Connect. If we go into the settings menu there, down there on Easy Connect. Now, I've disabled Easy Connect by default. Maybe you're using it right now because of the full details on the Deadbolt ransomware attack aren't known. Then right now, everything at the moment, even the non-confirmed stuff, seems to indicate that Easy Connect is a big part of the problem. So if you have Easy Connect on right now, turn it off. Disable Easy Connect right now until you hear otherwise. Again, if it is enabled here, tick that box to disable Easy Connect. And with that, there's also a lot of stuff about creating manual connections, which, if you know what you're doing, aren't that bad, which also allow you to play with the ports. But right now, until the full details on this ransomware attack have been established, I would still recommend not allowing remote access to this NAS right now. Sorry about the break in recording there. When you play with a lot of remote settings, that can make your browser very, very angry. Next up, go into the settings menu here. Now we're going to be talking about changing some of those default ports. If you go into the general tab there, you'll see immediately a few things worth talking about. Now, the HTTP port is kind of like the doorway where the lock is on the IP there of the device you're utilizing there. But what I would highlight right now, if you have an SSL certificate that you want to try and use and enable onto your device and enable secure encryption, then do enable it. I've added that box, and as you can see, because I'm not using an inbuilt SSL certificate or carried one over and exported it onto this NAS because it's a fresh installation, it will let you know it's an unsecure line there. Again, that's not as applicable to what we're doing right now, but if we're going to talk about good housekeeping, I wanted to include it. But the thing that everyone is highlighting here is about these default ports right here, because a lot of the time ransomware gets through, whether you're using, if it breaks through a third-party device, client hardware in your network environment, or remote access from things on Easy Connect. One of the ways you can prevent it is changing that default port. You can see there that the system is using the HTTP port default at 8000 and the HTTPS port at 8001. So change those to something else. Again, go nuts, make it what you want. And again, as soon as you change that, click apply, it will log you out of your system and you'll have to go in via the new port there. As you can see, it's now bringing me in via the new port, and now that default pathway is not going to be available there all the way to external users that are trying to exploit things. And again, there are lots more things you could be doing as general housekeeping. I'm going to do a dedicated video on security management, but I just wanted to focus just on some of the factors right now with regards to portal access and the problems that are arising from that easy correct system there. But next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about the users who preemptively powered down their systems unsecurely. Now, some users, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, have been greeted with the following message here on the left hand side of the screen. When the attack happened, again, completely understandably, they panicked and they powered down the device, and they didn't power it down safely. So they didn't go in via the system software and shut it down manually. They didn't do that, hold the button for 3 seconds, as mentioned by Asustor themselves. What that does is make the system shut down safely. No, they pulled the power cable or they held that power button for what felt like 10, 20 seconds, an eternity. And the result was that if the encryption was taking place on the system files, not your data, the result has been that the system's core software has become corrupted, and therefore when you access your Asustor NAS, it is now stating uninitialized. Now, this is probably the most problematic situation to be in right now. The reason being that unlike when we saw this piece of shit message here, and that's right, I'm keeping in that swear word because I'm annoyed, unlike with this message where at least you have a viable option to send money, they've created this because it's not in Deadbolt Group's interest to not give you access to your system. They need leverage, they need the means with which to take your money and give you something in return. That's how this works, and I don't approve of it, but that's their modus operandi. That is their way of doing this. This, on the other hand, is something that has been caused by a perfectly natural reaction to shut the system down. A lot of people have assumed when the power cable and the LAN cable were inside that this was being orchestrated remotely, when in fact ransomware of this nature is not conducted remotely. It is instigated remotely with a push and a command, but the activity is all inside the system. It is an exploit that is taking advantage of the system's own service of compiling and compressing archiving data. It just happens to do it in a very malicious way. So powering down the system, think of it in terms of every time you've ever tried to update your mobile phone, your tablet, your Windows updates. My God, there's a lot of them. And there's a clear message on screen that says, do not power down your device. Make sure it's on mains power. The reason being, if you interrupt that process, you will have file conflicts. You will have a file system that has a mixture of old and new, and indeed corrupt files that may be midway through their process. That is how users have ended up with an uninitialized status. Now, unfortunately, unlike a lot of stuff I've talked about so far, resolution on this one is pretty oblique. I nearly said another bad word there. Now, right now, if you are affected in that way, I've only really got one recommendation for you at this stage, and that's to head over to this doc here, supplied by Asustor, on that article linked in the description, and fill out that form. This form will allow you to detail your circumstances right now, and allow them, if they're working, if now they're working on this, when a solution presents itself, for them to let you know as quickly as possible. Now, it's worth highlighting that in this scenario here, there is nothing ransomware group can do as it stands, any ransomware group, because in this scenario here, you need the file system repaired. Now, perhaps Asustor is going to work on an update that is applied to their control center that will allow it, under uninitialized, to add the option to repair, and then repair the system information, much like a USB disk can be used in Windows, or when you have an app that you've had an issue with and you go into the control panel in Windows, and then from there look at packages, and it allows you to repair. That is the only way you're going to get around this. Now, a lot of users have indeed highlighted that that's not the only thing you could do, and that leads me to the final part of this video, the future, because it's not only a case of Asustor working on a means of repairing the system externally via the Asustor Control Center, as mentioned, if they do work on that, but they may have to start working on decryptors, which again may or may not still need the encryption key from the ransomware group. Now, for this scenario, I'd like to use an example from QNAP, because when QNAP was hit by the encryption known as QLocker, not dissimilar to what we've seen here, they worked with a company known as PhotoRec. And what that did is it allowed them to connect your NAS. If we have a look at it there, you connected an external drive to your NAS. That external drive, make sure you had a drive that was at least 1.5 to 2 times the size of the data in your NAS. And then from there, you ran the application for QNAP known as QRescue, and it would roll back files to a previous version. Much like the original application PhotoRec would be used on photography to revert files back to a previous revision. The hope is that Asustor will be able to work on a tool not unlike this to allow users via an app that can be installed in the App Center, if they have access to the NAS and can circumnavigate this horrible screen, that it will allow them to start exporting the unencrypted files in their previous revision onto that external drive. Now, at the moment, that's really the only way, as it stands, short of getting the encryption key from Deadbolt to get your files back. Now, this is not something that's happening right now. This will take time. I think it took QNAP under a month at least to get this resolution up and running. So if you are a business user, this may be too little too late and it's too long to wait. But again, if you've been hit by this uninitialized stamp here, then this is going to be step 2 that I've just discussed. Step 1 is going to be accessing your NAS. So if Asustor are able to supply a repair option to this, which allows it to check the NAS, check the file system of the NAS on those drives, and therefore come up with resolution and repair, then that will open the door to potentially this afterwards, allowing recreation of that data to a previous revision. There's other apps such as Test Disk, which have been used similarly, that have allowed users to repair data on there and revert files back. But once again, it's by no means foolproof, and it does also rely on the encryption method, because a lot of the time this may be not even an option to roll things back on this data, regardless of things like snapshots. The last thing I'll touch on when it comes to if you've been hit by this right now. This is going to be a slow process. If you've got backups in place, I'm really pleased for you that you've been listening to the idea of having backups. If you haven't, I know you don't want to hear this, but you should have had backups in place. I'm not going to be that guy. I will say, if you're faced with this uninitialized message, then I would perhaps recommend that you either get some new drives to put in your Asustor NAS if you want to continue using it, and put these to one side. Do not format them yet. I do think it's too early to format them. If you're feeling brave, you can look at maybe getting like a Linux VM, or getting a Linux machine up and running, and then connecting the drive if you're in maybe a RAID 1 environment. This was detailed in the comments by another user. If we scroll on down here, if I can find it, it is in maybe a RAID 1 environment where the data's not been spread over multiple disks. And say in a RAID 1 environment, you would find that the data is identical on each drive. You could put that drive in a docking station and then connect that docking station, much like you see here, but rather than connect it to a NAS, you connect it to a Linux PC, and then allow that Linux PC to access via command, see the data, and then transfer that data onto a new drive. But once again, this is a far more technical operation. And again, if we scroll down, I will find it here. There it is on screen. So let's open it up there in another tab for us here. And again, really useful guide here by another one of the commenters down here. And this is what he did to recover and access his data there via a RAID 1 environment there, connecting it to a Linux machine, and it allowed him to be able to see the contents of that drive. Maybe it was still going to be encrypted, but again, I recommend checking that out. It's linked. Hopefully I'll get that linked in the description, but as well as it is linked there in the comments of that article. But that's about it. Again, if you're watching this video and you haven't been here, get your backups in order. I know a lot of you have bought this NAS saying, I bought this NAS as a backup. It's supposed to be a backup. Yes, it can work as a backup, but if you're backing up multiple PCs, multiple phones, multiple laptops onto this device, and then you delete files from your phone, from your laptop or whatever, you're deleting files, then it's not a backup anymore, is it? Because now there's only one copy of that data and it's on the NAS. It's not a backup. It was no safer when it was just on your PC than it is just on the NAS. It's about having 1, 2, or 3 stages of backup. Again, there's a free advice section linked in the description. We're dealing with an overwhelming number of inquiries right now. And again, I do just recommend strongly that you visit this page listed on the left-hand side of the screen there. We're updating. We've already done 3 updates to it at the time of recording. And as new information comes out, I will publish it on there. And of course, if you have been hit by this, head over to Asustor's own website, or go to the link in the description where there is detailed information about how to submit a claim, or not so much a claim, submit a report of what's happened to you so far to Asustor. And then from there, if they are able to work out resolution on this, it's easier for them to let you know. Apart from that, thank you so much for watching. This has been a particularly shit story to talk about. I've got to say, I'm going to chuck out the S word again. But apart from that, again, subscribe, click like, whatever you want to do. I'm sorry if this has hit you, and I'll see you on the next video.